Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Charles Bierbauer. Over the past month, South Carolina has attracted its share of political attention. The resignation of now former Senator Jim DeMint, and then the selection of his replacement, newly sworn-in Senator Tim Scott. But South Carolina's senior Senator Lindsey Graham continues to be no less an important figure in the nation's capital.
I believe we need to raise the debt ceiling, but if we don't raise it without a plan to get out of debt, all of us should be fired. When you're in a hole, stop digging.
If you turn on network or cable news political programming these days, there's a good chance you'll see Senator Lindsey Graham. Whether he's talking about immigration or opposing one of President Obama's nominations or the fiscal cliff.
I want to let people in South Carolina understand where I'm coming from. I know that we must raise the debt ceiling in a responsible way. The ability to borrow money by the federal government is essential in terms of keeping services flowing to the people. The willingness of the federal government to borrow money without a plan to get out of debt is damning us as a nation to becoming Greece. To me, the perfect plan is to raise the debt ceiling in a responsible fashion. That would include a plan in place to eventually get this nation out of debt. There is a way, in a bipartisan fashion, to raise the debt ceiling and get this nation out of debt, and it begins with a budget. It's been over 3 years since the Senate has passed a budget. Why in the world would you allow any organization to borrow money if they don't have a budget? Can you imagine any business in South Carolina deeply in debt going to their banker and say, I need to borrow more money, and when the banker says, let me look at your budget, and the answer is, I don't have one? Well, I can tell you the days of not having a budget have to be over for the good of the country.
Senator Graham is up for re-election in 2014, with some pundits looking at the possibility he'll have a primary challenge. But he's also got a substantial war chest in the bank. Senator Graham was in Columbia serving as the keynote speaker at the Riley Institute's Wilkins Awards this week, and he sat down with us to talk politics. Senator Graham, thank you for joining us. The new Congress, and here you go again. You're a bit of an old hand at this.
Well, there's nothing like a new beginning. The first day of school, the first football game, the new Congress. It's a chance to kind of shed some of the baggage and be optimistic, at least for a minute. So I'll be optimistic at least for a minute.
So the minute has nearly expired. What are your priorities for this?
Well, the first thing we have to deal with is raising the debt ceiling, funding the government, and setting aside defense cuts that I think would destroy the Defense Department, all by March. Immigration reform, I'd like to get that issue solved for the nation as a whole. The year of reckoning, I would say 2013 is the year of reckoning. We run out of the ability to delay dealing with the debt. The fiscal cliff was a sign of what could be. The ghost of Christmas past. I hope that the year of reckoning will result in bipartisan solutions, and it's time to confront Iran before it's too late.
I've taken to describing it as less of a cliff and more of a cascade, where you sort of tumble from one ledge to the next ledge to the next ledge, and you've landed on the first one after dealing with some of the tax issues. Is the revenue side, from your perspective, is that pretty much resolved, or do there need to be more revenues? And then I'll ask you about the debt.
Well, the reason I voted for the package was it prevented what I thought would be a fiscal calamity. If tax rates went up on everybody, defense sequestration kicked in, if all that happened at the same time, it would have crippled our economy. So I voted for a package that protected people $450,000 and below, making the Bush tax cuts permanent at that level. It reformed the death tax. It was going to go from 35 to 55, and we put off defense cuts for 2 months. Having said that, we did nothing on the spending side. It generated about $600 billion of revenue to deal with the deficit. That's a good thing, as long as it goes on the deficit. But in terms of the big deal, I'm looking at a 3-to-1 ratio like Simpson-Bowles. If I were king, I would say take Simpson-Bowles, let's take it out on the floor of the Senate and vote on it. So whether or not we do more revenue, I think depends on the size and the scope of the deal. And I know this, we're not going to do any more revenue until we do some spending cuts.
3-to-1 ratio, meaning $3 in cuts for every dollar in revenue.
Yeah, and cleaning up the tax code should be a bipartisan effort. There are a lot of special interest deductions and exemptions that should be taken away from the few and put back into the Treasury for the benefit of the many. I'd like to have a 25% corporate tax rate, and I'd be willing to eliminate deductions for upper income Americans if the money went to pay off the debt and lower tax rates to help our economy. I don't want to spend any more money on the government. I want to start getting us out of debt. And raising the debt ceiling is going to be one heck of a fight. We spent $2.1 trillion from last August in 17 months. And we just can't keep spending $2 trillion every 17 months without addressing the debt. So,
can I take you back
sure.
to what you were talking about, taxes? And you know, we've had the tax cut permanentized. That's a terrible word, but made more permanent.
Right.
But you're still talking about other aspects of the tax code that have
Right.
to be revised.
There's two ways to look at this. Raising tax rates generated about $600 billion in revenue. Simpson-Bowles didn't go down that road. They eliminated deductions and generated about $1 trillion in new revenue. Every year we give out through the tax code $1.2 trillion in special interest deals and sometimes things that we all enjoy like mortgage interest reduction. So what I would suggest is that we look at the tax code to make it more entrepreneurial, lower rates, eliminate deductions, and take that new revenue to pay down some debt and buy down rates. For me to support more revenue, you would have to show me a plan that would turn around the long-term spending problems of the country, and that takes us to Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid.
Which of those tax deductions are palatable for you to
You know, what I would
eliminate?
like to do is basically, over time, eliminate all of them but two: charitable giving and interest on our homes, with a cap. That would take about almost $1 trillion a year back into the Treasury, and I would like to take that $1 trillion and spend some of it to lower overall tax rates to create jobs here at home. We got one of the highest corporate rates, take it from 35 to 25, but also take some of that money to pay down debt. But when you look out over the next 20 or 30 years, Charles, the real big debt explosion comes through baby boomer retirement, putting pressure on Social Security and Medicare.
Where do you go on the cut side?
Okay, here's what I would suggest. That 35% of our spending is the discretionary budget. We can reform the discretionary budget. We've taken $489 billion out of the Department of Defense. You might could take some more out over time. We've had an explosion of spending in the food stamp program. But you got to remember that about 70% almost of our spending is on autopilot. It's interest on the debt and entitlements. And if I were the president, here's what I would challenge the Congress to do. Like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, let's get together on Medicare and raise the age of eligibility from 65 to 67 over a 10 or 20 year period. That doesn't affect anybody for the moment, and in the out years it saves a ton of money. Let's ask people in my income level to pay more into the Medicare system, because about half of it's subsidized by the General Treasury, and to take less out of Social Security. It's called means testing. Ask upper income Americans to pay more into Medicare, take less from Social Security, and all of us together adjust the inflationary component of the benefits, CPI. Bottom line, we're overestimating inflation, which makes the benefits more robust over time.
They get bigger. When Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill sat down, and I was covering the White House, I remember that.
Yeah.
They were willing partners.
Yes, that's the key.
Are there willing partners today?
Yes, and there are plenty of Tip O'Neills. We just need a Ronald Reagan. And to President Obama, he's put CPI adjustment on the table. If he would go ahead and embrace the three things I talked about: adjusting the age over time doesn't affect anybody in the near term. CPI adjustment done in a bipartisan fashion saves hundreds of billions of dollars, and is something I think we can and should do. And means testing is a long overdue reform. So if the president would reach out to Boehner and myself and others, I would be willing, with that kind of package, to look beyond the 10-year window in savings. When you lock yourself into a 10-year window, the changes really don't yield that much in benefit. But if you look in 20 and 30 years down the road, you can save literally trillions of dollars in future expense.
Now, John Boehner is sort of casting the Tip O'Neill role here.
Yeah,
It's hard
yeah.
to picture, but how do you define your role? You said if Obama would reach out to you.
I think a practical Ronald Reagan conservative. I haven't talked to the president in over a year. I do know this, without entitlement reform, we'll never get the country straight. In 2037, the debt will be twice the size of the economy. $52,000 per every child born in terms of the debt they owe. In 2050, Social Security and Medicare will cost as much as the entire revenue stream coming from taxpayers. So now's the time. You still got about a decade left to turn this thing around. So I'd love to see the president lead on this. I'd like him to have a historic second term. Immigration reform, entitlement reform, getting the nation on a different path than becoming Greece, confronting Iran before they get a nuclear weapon, an energy policy that protects the environment and also allows us to become energy independent. I really, honest to God, would like the president to do big things in his second term. The big things he did in his first term were pretty much all partisan and I think pretty expensive.
I want to get to the defense cuts, but you mentioned immigration. What does immigration reform do for South Carolina?
Well, immigration reform is a necessity. We've got broken borders. We've got probably 10 or 12 million people here illegally. It's not healthy to have that many people in your country that are undocumented, not paying taxes, in no man's land, living in pretty bad conditions and sometimes exploiting the system.
They're not all not paying taxes. I mean,
they're not in a traditional sense. They're basically undocumented people who are in the shadows of our country. It's not good for them. It's not good for us. We need to control our borders. We need workers. Believe it or not, with almost 10% unemployment in South Carolina, there are a lot of businesses that can't find local workers. If you look in South Carolina, you can't find somebody to help process meat or do certain manual labor jobs, you should be able to get someone outside the country but pay them a competitive wage. What would it do for the country? When I was born, there were 16 workers for every Social Security recipient. Today there's 3, and in 20 years there'll be 2. We're going to have a labor shortage. A reformed immigration system based on merit. You can only come into the country if you add value to our economy, to the 12 million. You can stay, but only on our terms. You have to learn the language. You can't be a citizen by breaking in the line. You have to get in the back of the line. You got to pay a fee or a penalty for the law you violated. It would create order out of chaos. It would create economic growth. To get the labor force we need in the future, we're going to have a vibrant immigration system.
You're resistant to further defense cuts.
Yes, for the moment.
Totally.
I think,
Absolutely.
well, for the moment, I think we're at war. When you look at defense spending in terms of GDP, we're on the low end. When you look at defense spending relative to GDP in a time of war, we're historically low. We've reduced defense spending by $489 billion. That's been hard, but I think you've got to give on the defense side, balance the budget.
Isn't most of that the reduced cost of the wars?
No, that is within the Pentagon itself.
Okay.
We're not talking about savings from deployments. But sequestration, in the words of Leon Panetta, is crazy, will destroy the finest military in the history of the world at the time we need it, and would be shooting ourselves in the head. You'd have the smallest Navy since 1915, 232 ships, the smallest armies since 1940, and the smallest Air Force in history. I don't want to go down that road. Once we get Iran behind us, and I hope we will, once we get Afghanistan wound down and that conflict is stabilized, then come back to me to talk about further defense cuts. Because if we had to go into Iran, the F-35, the F-22, the B-2 are the weapons that give us an advantage over an enemy. And I'm not looking for a fair fight. I'm looking for a decisive victory by the United States against any opponent.
Do you want to go into Iran?
No,
Is it avoidable?
I don't know if it's avoidable. If you attacked Iran tomorrow, and if the president came to me and said, listen, we've tried sanctions, they're not working, I would vote to use military force knowing it would be opening Pandora's box. They would hit us back in the Gulf. We have about 60,000 troops within their rocket range. They would come after Israel and they'd probably activate suicide bombers. But if they get a nuclear weapon, Charles, if the Iranian Shia regime gets a nuclear weapon, then Arab Sunni states will want a nuclear weapon. And my big fear is that the Iranians would share that technology with a terrorist group. you would empty Pandora's box. That's the world we live in, very hard choices.
Let me ask you just one more thing. You mentioned Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, who's eager to get back to Carmel, California.
Who's been a very good Secretary of Defense.
And that brings up the President's nomination for the new Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, whom you served with in the Senate. You're not thrilled with Chuck Hagel. In fact, you've described it as an in-your-face nomination. Why is it
and
that?
let me tell you, he's a passionate man, Chuck Hagel, and I like passionate people. Disagreeing with me is no political sin. I'm not looking for someone who agrees with me. I'm looking for someone that I think is in the mainstream of thinking about the big issues of our time. John Kerry is clearly on the other end of the spectrum. I will gladly vote for him as Secretary of State. Here's my problem with...
What about John Brennan for CIA?
Most likely, but I want to get the information from the CIA about the Benghazi debacle. They haven't shared the information, so I'm not going to let him go forward until we find out what happened in Benghazi. And
so in a nutshell then, what's your opposition to Chuck Hagel?
I think the positions he's taken against Iran are just really out there. To suggest, he was one of two senators who voted against sanctioning Iran. He has suggested that Israel must deal directly with Hamas, a terrorist organization. He's tried to kill Israeli children by sending rockets indiscriminately into Israel. He was one of a dozen senators who refused to sign a letter asking for Hezbollah to be designated a terrorist organization. He said that the Iraq surge was the worst foreign policy blunder since Vietnam. It actually worked. So I really have a problem with his positions, not him as a person. He's a brave man, he's a good man, but he's to the left of the president. What kind of signal are you sending to Iran and to Israel if you pick someone who has been the most antagonistic toward Israel of any senator that I know, and quite frankly has had a view toward Iran that I think is naive?
It's an interesting perspective, a Republican to the left of the president.
We live in really weird times, but I would say this, that the president is much more in line with my thinking than Chuck Hagel about Iran and Israel.
Senator Graham, thank you. The South Carolina General Assembly was gavelled into session this week. State House reporter Katie Geer gives us a look at what can be expected from the House and Senate this year.
Republican House Speaker Bobby Harrell called the House to order and began the first regular session of the 120th South Carolina General Assembly on Tuesday. Both parties of the House and Senate have a long list of issues they would like to see addressed and end in their favor this year. The main contention between Republicans and Democrats seems to be over the Affordable Health Care bill that Governor Haley has been against. Newly elected Democrat House Minority Leader Todd Rutherford of Richland County says passing the health care bill is the right thing for the state to do.
The issue of primary importance right now is what we do with our health care law, the expansion of Medicaid. We have the option right now in South Carolina of covering over 300,000 people with what Obama has passed in terms of the Affordable Care Act. The federal government would pick up 90% of that tab, leaving us to only pay for 10% of that. It's a no-brainer in terms of economic decisions. It's a no-brainer in terms of healthcare decisions. We looked at a rally today of a number of people that came to the State House that were opposed to Obamacare. I bet you about 80% of those people are on Medicare themselves or receive some type of government health care, but they're saying that they don't want it to be affordable to other people. We can do better. We can make sure that a number of South Carolinians, in this case over 300,000, get the health care that they need, and make sure that our hospitals are taken care of in the process. Our hospitals stand to lose a bunch of money in the billions of dollars if we don't do this. So it's a no-brainer. That is one of the first things on the agenda.
But House Republican Majority Leader Bruce Bannister insists the new health care laws are unconstitutional and go against what the state really needs.
The federal government's overreaching in their power and their attempt to tell us what we should and shouldn't do is something the House Republicans are offended by. And we want to say, hey, South Carolina can make our own decisions. We can handle things best here on our own. And so that conflict will take up a lot of the debate time. If you frame the debate, how do we make South Carolina more healthy, then you would recognize that health insurance and healthy citizens don't necessarily match up. We've got some areas of the state that are very at risk, and they have some real chronic illness issues that are not going to be dealt with just by saying, okay, now you have coverage. I think the Democrats want to change the debate and say that this Affordable Care Act is the one-size-fits-all solution to our health problems, which it's not. I think South Carolina has some unique challenges in the healthcare system, and we need to address those because we're the boots on the ground and we know what's going on. The House Republican caucus is committed to having South Carolina control its own destiny. If we're going to be on the hook for billions of dollars in premiums and Medicaid match funds in the future, we want to make sure that the system we're getting is what is best for South Carolina.
Bannister agreed that something needs to be done about South Carolina's health care system, but hopes there's another way besides agreeing to Obama's health care plan and Medicaid expansion. A petition for the nullification of the Affordable Care Act has been filed, even though President Obama's health care law has been held up by the Supreme Court. At a previous meeting, both Democrats and Republicans spelled out their agendas for the 2013 legislative session. For Republicans, their goals include seeking election reforms following the filing controversies of this past election, securing the state's data, reforming ethics laws, oppose Obamacare, seek tax reform, grow the economy, and figure out how to work government reconstruction. The Democrats' goals include challenging the Republicans on ethics reform, approve early voting in South Carolina, look at the Department of Revenue and how much they are spending on cybersecurity, expand funding for education, push for Medicaid expansion along with Obamacare, and support the lawsuit over the state employee health insurance. While they may focus on many of the same things, the two parties differ on such issues as ethics, Medicaid, and early voting. But education is a big issue for both sides of the aisle. The Democrats are pushing for more funding for K-4 through 12.
We're going to try and make sure that education gets funded at the levels necessary. We always talk about that funding has gone up, and it has gone up, but everything has gone up. Everything costs more, so the funding for education for our kids must go up to meet those needs as well. Technical education, as important as it is to make sure that people are trained to handle high-tech and high-skilled jobs when they come to South Carolina, but making sure that K through 12 gets the funding that they need, that we have pre-K programs, and that we get the money to do what it is, and to do what it takes to educate the children of South Carolina.
And Republicans want to reevaluate the education system's budget.
You know, the education funding hasn't been changed in decades, and that's something that needs to be looked at. You set up a formula, and it makes sense at the time, and that was 1970-something. And we need to move forward and look at how things are now, look at the counties, how they're made up, really study the funding formulas and figure out what's the best way to get state dollars to the public schools so they can do the best job they can do, be as efficient as they can be, and still have a world-class education system.
This year's legislation promises to be a well-heated debate over many issues, and as the first day of the 120th session came to a close, lawmakers look forward to the coming months. Lieutenant Governor Glenn McConnell hosted Senate Majority Leader Harvey Peeler and Minority Leader Nikki Setzler on his weekly program this week in the State House, and both parties' agendas in the Senate closely mirror those in the House.
Gentlemen, I'll just start with you, Senator Setzler. Session opens. Contentious session? You think it'll be a hard-working session? Gridlock or what? What do you see?
Well, first of all, I hope it is not gridlock, because I think people are tired of the gridlock that's in Washington, and they're looking for us. And Senator Peeler and I have this history of a bipartisan cooperation trying to move this state forward, and I think that's the way we go into the session. I think it'll be a hard-working session. I think we got a lot of major issues. From cybersecurity to early voting to campaign reform. So I think there's a huge and numerous issues that we will be addressing this year.
Things my caucus are interested in: transportation funding, spending caps, the cybersecurity, the hacking situation for our economic development part, and then government reform, Department of Administration, and the ethics legislation, and then the ballot fix. I call it the filing fiasco of last year. So our plate's full. We've started early. I think the Judicial Committee has already voted out a couple of bills, the ballot bill, the ballot fix, and hopefully we'll get on that early. And then another issue that we'll be dealing with is the sweepstakes, and that
Correct.
Came out. And so that
Closing that loophole.
That's right. And then along with that, and I know it's something you've talked about for years, Senator, is the raffle. Up our way, the Lions Club especially, they've had an annual raffle. That's how there's major funding. And so the great gambling debate, I think, is on the horizon.
Well, I think we have to make education a priority in this state. And whether people agree or disagree, funding is a part of that. And this concept that we're going to keep funding it where it was 4 years ago or 3 years ago, sooner or later has got to change for us to move forward. And secondly, you mentioned the article in the paper, which I have not seen, about teacher pay raises. Clearly, teachers need a pay raise. We have issues in some of the education areas of this state, but we have a lot of people that do a very good job, that are innovative, on cutting edge, are doing great things in the schools of this state. And we need to be positive about that and not always be attacking the education community and those people who are out there teaching our children on a daily basis. We've got a new program in this state called Teach America, which has been very, very successful, and I think there's some recommendations to increase the funding for Teach America. We got charter schools that we've got virtual education now, which is a thing of the future, and that's how education is going to go. Tied to funding, though, is you can't keep doing it the same old way. You got to modernize. You got to get into the 21st century with your delivery system. Same thing with higher education.
For more information and for in-depth coverage of this year's legislative session, visit our website at scetv.org. For all of us at ETV, I'm Charles Bierbaum.